All right, hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Liz Johns, and I am the Teaching and Learning Librarian at the College Library. And we at the library asked faculty and staff to make resource recommendations to the library to support our community in learning and practicing anti-racism. We asked them to tell us what work spoke to them and what they thought would support our community. Because there's so much great information out there, and it can be difficult knowing where to start. So joining me today is Kendyl Walker, a pre-major academic advisor in the Academic Center for Excellence. And Kendyl recommended When They Call You a Terrorist, Black Lives Matter Memoir by Patrisse Khan-Cullors and Asha Bandele, which is available in print in the library. So thank you for joining me today, Kendyl.
I'm happy to be here.
Good. I already said what you recommended. So can you just first give us a summary of the material of the book?
Yeah, so When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, it's a really beautiful written memoir about like understanding why the Black Lives Matter movement was created. So the memoir really starts off with like Patrisse Khan-Cullors just talking about her life in the impoverished Los Angeles neighborhood and how her family experiences prejudice and discriminations at the hands of the police. This book explores a lot of different intersections. So it explores race, sexuality, mental health, and religion, but it also highlights Black culture, Black art, Black community, and its struggle for Black people to find a place in this certain society. And it also looks at how like systematic racism like plays a huge part of Black communities and how sometimes Black communities are held down because of systematic racism. All in all, it's just really a wonderful book about like Black lives and the fight for Black freedoms, helping people understand exactly why the Black Lives Matter movement was created, which was because Cullors saw so many people in her life being disrespected by the police. And from the people she knows and the people she loves, she wanted that like Black love to like shine. And she wanted people to understand that Black people do not want this. We don't want to be discriminated against. We just want to matter. So with this is just a beautiful written memoir just about Black lives mattering.
Okay, thank you. So it's a memoir, so it's primarily from her perspective and about her family and her community in Los Angeles, correct?
Yes.
Did she pull in voices from other community members or other friends, or is it really just kind of focused on her bubble in her community in Los Angeles?
It's mostly, she doesn't really pull in that many different people. She talks about some of the people that she met. For example, she talks about like her co-founding members was I think is Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi, who are the co-founder members of the Black Lives Matter movement. She talks about different parts in history where this kind of played a big part. Like she talks about Emmett Till a little bit. And then she also talks, of course, about Trayvon Martin, which is the reason why the Black Lives Matter movement was started. She really pulls from the George Zimmerman case. And when she found out that he was basically not guilty, she really felt very disheartened to find out that Trayvon Martin's life did not matter. And from that, she wanted people to understand that like Black lives really do matter. So throughout her life, she does a lot of exploring and she does a lot of going to certain protests for people's lives. And she really, really takes some time to really get to know the family members, such as for like Trayvon Martin's mom. And she really takes some time to really explore basically these big protests that are happening with like Black Lives Matter.
Okay, so she did kind of go out and talk to other people like Trayvon Martin's family,
Yeah.
and included that. Interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So why is this material important to you?
I think, I guess the main reason why this material is so important to me is one, I am a Black woman, I identify with this. And even though me and Patrisse's life is not particularly the same, we don't have the same experience, I do know what it feels like to be discriminated against, faced with prejudice, feeling like you can just feel certain like systematic racism in the air. Sometimes when you go in the area, you can experience certain like microaggressions, which is a form of racism as well. So when hearing this from like Patrisse's life, it just hit me, you know? it hit me because I have family members that go through this, that have been to jail, that have experienced like police brutality, and I have people that have gone who just want to live, I guess, in this situation, and it's just so hard for them because they're faced with this whole experience that sometimes does not benefit them. And I like when you feel that and when you understand that and when you get that, it just kind of hurts. And then you just think about Black lives throughout this whole, I think ever since history started in the United States, if you think about it, Black people have been oppressed and marginalized since they stepped foot on this continent. And because of that, sometimes when certain things happen in the news, all you can think about is everything that happened beforehand, like all the stuff that led up to this. I think people tend to think that when something happened, we're only thinking about that particular person, but actually we're thinking about all the people who have faced injustice. And it's something that it's very hard for us to not be mad about, I guess. It's something where you like have these feelings and you're trying to be in control, but sometimes sadness and anger hits you and you just want to understand, like, why am I not free? Why does my life not matter? And I think that's why it's just so important for me. And even thinking at my work, when I think about students of color who face these certain discriminations, you don't want them to feel this when they leave Goucher. You don't even want them to feel this when they're in Goucher. So one of the things is just the reason why this is so important to me is I just think because I'm such a part of this community and I care so much that I just want people to understand that we do matter. We're not trying to do anything out of hate, but we really just want people and the system in general to see us equally.
As people, right?
Yeah, as people. As people. I think for so long, I feel like when I think about racism or when I just think about like people in general in the United States, I think about this table and how white people have been at this table like for the whole period of time ever since this country was created. And every time Black people, whether it was slavery, whether it's civil rights and just Black Lives Matters, every time somebody tries to make it up to the table, we're pushed down. We can never sit at the table. No matter how much we have sacrificed our bodies and like goals and our freedoms for this country, we're still not at the table. And it's just been such one of those struggles that you're constantly trying to tell people, but it's almost like they're like blocking it, like down, sit below the table, don't get up above the table.
Yeah, I haven't heard that analogy before, but that's an interesting one. Sitting at the table, or it seems almost like it's hard to even get in the room where the table is.
Right, exactly.
It's not just a door, it's a door that's locked and gated and dead bolted, and even getting through the door to get to even see that where the table is.
Right.
And to see this whole history, like you said, it's not just these one moments, but looking at the systems and structures that have allowed these moments to happen. Yesterday, I was talking with Professor Miranda Aldaco, and she mentioned that the next thing that she's going to watch is the documentary 13th.
Oh, yeah, I heard of that.
So it goes through the history of what happened after the 13th Amendment, and it really clearly shows the systems and structures that lead up to each of these moments that we're experiencing now, and how in the prison industrial complex, and how the prison systems in the United States is really just this extension of slavery, and how all the 13th Amendment did was just kind of change the nature of oppression and enslavement for Black people and people of color in America. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's shocking how the structures that we've set up lead to these moments, and how we keep having these moments and we're not fixing it.
Right.
It's shocking.
I have to agree. It's just shocking. I think when I started to learn this history, or when I like tried to do my own history on my own, I was just I thought about everything that was happening, and I was like, I can't believe all this stuff is happening. Like, and I just think about that with any like person of color. Like sometimes I think of like the internment camps. I just think about everything that happens, and you're like, oh my God, oh my goodness, like this really happened. And a lot of people, they don't want to acknowledge it, or they want to admit that their ancestors could do something like this. And sometimes you have to really just say like, and acknowledge your history. Like I'm not, when I talk to like people or students, I'm like, I'm not calling you a racist for trying to ignore it. I just want you to acknowledge it because it did happen, because you don't want it to continue to happen. You want people to understand how systems of oppressions have played in many people's life. And when I even think about like intersectionality, I think about how like gender has been, how Black women or people with certain genders have been discriminated against. And you think about people with disabilities and how everybody, again, is not at the table. It's like we're still, if you have like some sort of like part of diversity, you're not at the table. It's just saddening, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I say it's shocking, and you say it's shocking, but then there are people who are living it and who don't see it as shocking. So I think it's shocking for people like me who are learning about this now. But even I was a history major in college. I studied American history, and I didn't learn about this stuff. So there is something wrong with our systems that are leading to this. So it sounds like this has been really important to you and how you work with students. And you touched a little bit on this. But has this book in particular impacted how you work with students at Goucher in any way?
I think, if anything, like I said, I think it just helps me understand and see that students, or help me want to understand students' stories. I think if anything, I want to know what students go through. I want to know why students have come to Goucher, how much they have been, and how much have they put into like their experiences, how much do they want to know about other people's experiences. I think one of the things I always kind of, how this really relates to my work is when I'm helping a student with like their schedule. And I've noticed that some of my students, like we have a race and power perspective class that students have to take. It's usually just one class they take that really even talks about power and privilege or race. And sometimes students, they might bring a credit over that has something to do with race and power and perspective. And so they think it might transfer over as race, power, and perspective, but it might come out as like a general elective. And they're like, why does that not transfer over? I have done my diversity class, I should be finished. And you kind of want to let them know that, well, that's not true. One thing is diversity, anti-racism, just social justice cannot just fit in one class. You don't think that you just learn it one time and you're done.
Right.
I feel like I am still learning about social justice, anti-racism, my history. I feel like so many people, I'm thinking about my mother, she's in her 50s and she's still learning about basically anti-racism, social justice. It's just something that you constantly learn. For students, it's hard for them to really understand that until they are put into that position of being challenged, their thought process is being challenged. And I think one of the things is I always like encourage my students, like, no, you're not finished with your diversity. Your diversity just keeps on going forward. And you can use this race, power, and perspective class to kind of introduce yourself to other ideas, maybe other social justice issues that you really didn't know about. Yeah. So it's sometimes I think that's a hard conversation that students don't want to hear, but I feel like they need to hear too.
Right. It's not just about checking the box. And I've taken the diversity class, or I've gone to the diversity seminar, and now I'm done. I'm woke. I get it. And it's not, you can't do it in just one class. And even, I mean, I think like your mom in her 50s still learning. I think we're all still learning, and there's never going to be an end to learning. And I think that's I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm a librarian, because I love learning things. I love working with students on their research and learning about what they're researching and what they're interested in, because I get to learn new things all the time through helping them. And I think this is just another example of something that we're constantly trying to learn. And the idea of race, power, and perspective just kind of being a checkbox is, I think, is part of the problems of the systems and structures that we set up. It should be woven into the curriculum in different ways, and it shouldn't just be the one class, or it shouldn't just be in the Geographies of Justice Center or the Center for Hispanic and Latinx Studies. It should be across the curriculum, all over the place. And I think that's definitely something that we as an institution need to continue working towards as well. And it's something that we're working at in libraries, in the library and in our classes that we teach with students. It's about power and privilege in information, how information is created and disseminated, and who has access to that information. So similar to who has access to the table, but who has access to the information about where the room is even located.
Right, exactly. I think that's true. I think one of the things that I also like about Goucher is just one of the study abroad component, and how hopefully we'll make it more like students who make it very much an experience, because then they'll learn a little bit more about race and power and privilege and how it plays within like other countries and communities. But also I think I think they do at the beginning, before they come to Goucher, they have like a reading experience. They have to read a book. And I think that book usually plays into race, power, and privilege. So I think hopefully they're using those steps to kind of see how it all connects. Like, it's just not that race, power, and perspective class. We have been literally giving you some materials that you can use in order to start your social justice journey, your anti-racism journey. So hopefully, you understand that.
Yeah. And I think we could do better about making that more obvious to them. Yeah. It's not just this class, it's not just the tech box, it's the summer reading, it's the seminars, and it is in a lot of classes throughout the curriculum. I think faculty have to, when they propose new courses, I think the course formally asks how each course addresses that, but I think it's not always clear to the students. And the summer reading book this year, it's the same as last year. It's called Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions. And it's about I believe she's Mexican. She immigrated from Mexico, I believe. I read it last year. I haven't read it again this year, so I don't quite remember, but it's about her experience supporting immigrants from Latin America coming to the United States and filling out the application form. It's 40 questions. So she kind of goes through each question of the application and and tells stories of how she's supporting these people, mostly children, children who are alone and who have to fill out this form in English, and they don't speak a word of English. And so she volunteers with this, with an organization that helps people fill out these forms, which is just, I don't know. You have these people who don't speak English and the form is only in English. Like, that's a problem. Exactly. But we try to that's just another way we're trying to expose students to it through the summer reading. So
exactly.
So I think that kind of leads into my next question a little bit, thinking about what could members of the Goucher community learn from this material that you've recommended, the book by Patrisse Khan-Cullors.
So the one thing I think, the most important thing that people should know, is that the Black Lives Matter movement was created out of love. Cullors' love for her community, her family, herself, was about why she created the Black Lives Matter movement. She wanted people to live, Black people particularly, to live, to thrive, and just to be free from systematic racism. And I think the whole point of like Black Lives Matter is us to eliminate, or at least talk about, systematic racism. I think sometimes people believe we're just trying to focus on the racists that you see, maybe a KKK member or somebody that's just blatantly raising the Confederate flag in your face, but more on the line, and it is about that too, but it also morally talks about systematic racism, how United States has systematically oppressed Black people and people of color in general. Also talks about how like certain freedoms that we might have had have been just taken away, even if we even got any of those freedoms. But just this figuring out exactly how police brutality and systematic racism has played such a huge part of our story, and how we're trying to just eliminate that so we can just live.
Mm-hmm.
to live and thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book is really just about understanding the Black Lives Movement, knowing where it comes from, and I think that is a misconception that a lot of people have about what it is. I mean, when you see how it's portrayed in the media and on Twitter, it seems. I mean, there's like different worlds,
Yeah.
and there's one world where it's important and it's supported and it's discussed, and then you see the activists working.
Yeah.
And then there's the other world where they're calling the people who support the Black Lives Matter movement terrorists, which they are not. And I think that that message that it was created out of love is an important one that needs to be more well known. It wasn't something that came out of anger. I mean, there is anger about what's happening, but to know that it really was created out of love is a perspective that I think more people need to know about, for sure.
And I also think, and she talks a lot about like being called a terrorist. She talks about the time when she's being called a terrorist. Basically, it was like that protest in Texas that happened, where like it was like a veteran man like shot. It was at a Black Lives Matter protest.
Okay.
And some veteran, he shot. I think he shot a couple of police officers. Can't remember exactly how it was. It's like in the first chapter of the book that she talks about this, and she talks about how she felt being called a terrorist after that moment, because as soon as that moment happened, they called the Black Lives Matter movement a terrorist, and she just feels completely hurt by it, because she says she has no idea how she could be called a terrorist. She doesn't know how her fighting for Black lives can be considered a part of terror. And then, if anything, she talks a little bit more about this in the book, and how she feels that the Black community faces terror because of everything that happens in the community, whether it's poverty, whether it's like no mental health resources, or just having police just arrest young Black men. She just doesn't understand how she can be called a terrorist when these things happen by law.
Right. It's, yeah.
Yeah, emotional.
I know. Yeah, I'm sorry. And it's really, I'm really glad you recommended this book, because I haven't read it yet. Because there's so many things to read, but just talking to you about it after this, I think that it's going to kind of move up towards the top of my list, because I don't know a whole lot about how the movement started, and I've been learning more about it now in the past couple of months, but it sounds like a really moving memoir about this movement, and I think it'll be really helpful for me and for a lot of people, just to have a better understanding and to be not only a better ally, but a better spokesperson and activist for the movement as much as I can as a white person. But I think empathy is what I'm kind of hearing from you that's coming out of this book, is feeling and understanding the experiences of the Black community in America. And I think that's something that we need a lot more of in America right now, not just with this, but with COVID. And that's really kind of the missing ingredient.
Yeah, honestly, reading this book just came out of nowhere, because I read this book, I think this year, I think it was March or April when I read this book. And it came out of nowhere, because I had this book forever, but I just never read it. And then I just decided to read it, and I read it in like maybe 2 days. It's a very quick read. It's like not, I think 200 pages. And I read it, and I was like, I had all these type of emotions that I usually don't have. I'm not a very emotional person, but like I had all these type of emotions, and I was like, because her family members just sound like mine. Her mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and my grandmother and my father's kind of a Jehovah's Witness, and like she talks about how religion like plays a huge part of her life because of what her mother was, but she doesn't identify as Jehovah's Witness. She's a spiritual person, and she just talks about mental health, and just like her brother who struggled with mental health, and how he was arrested multiple times instead of treated. And it's just like, I've known people like that, and it just really hits you. I think it's just an emotional, like you said, empathy. You feel empathy for her. So it's something that like hits you, I think. and you don't expect it to hit you, because when you're reading it, you're just like, okay, let me read about like Black Lives Matter. How was this created? And then you realize that this is just a memoir about somebody's life who just experienced all these things in her life, you know? And it's just, it hits you, I would have to say.
Okay. Good to know. It's not something I'm going to be reading on the beach.
Yeah. Good way. I didn't read on the beach either, but it's definitely, I would say definitely not a beach read.
Okay. So what are you going to read next, read or watch next, related to anti-racism or oppression, anything along those lines? Do you have something queued up that you're going to read or watch next?
So I'm reading a book now. I think since everything that's been happening, I guess I just been starting on the collection of books that have been on the side of my on my bookshelf.
Uh-huh.
I think right now I'm reading this book called "So Do You Want to Talk About Race?" I think by Ujima Alulo.
Mm-hmm. I think that's on our list. Yeah.
That I'm on chapter 4, so I'm not that into it. But we have, like, in the book, she's already talking about, you know, what is racism, what does it mean to check my privilege, all that particular stuff. I think this book is really good if you want like an introduction to like critical race theory and understanding systematic racism as well. Like, I think for her, she really is talking about like systematic racism, how the system has promoted certain racist tendencies and how you just see it in your everyday life. It's like a sprinkle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and that's so kind of like microaggressions, right?
Yeah, like microaggressions, mostly like in microaggressions. She talks a lot about microaggressions.
Okay.
And stereotyping, and then things that like basically people just don't really notice and see. Like, just you can be doing something and basically it might be something that a person can feel and see as racism, such as, like we said, stereotyping, microaggressions,
Mm-hmm.
and things that like you really shouldn't say, but you don't even know what was wrong. Like, she talks a lot about like that question, like, where are you from? Like, how are you phrasing it? How are you saying it? You never know. That could be a microaggression.
Mm-hmm. No, really. Where are you
Right.
from?
Yeah. And you don't really like, you're not really thinking that as a microaggression. Like, you're just thinking like, okay, where are you from? You just want to know. Sometimes it's in that situation, but it can seem like it is a microaggression.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I get asked where I'm from, and I say I'm from Cleveland, and like that's, and unless somebody knows something about Cleveland, then they'll say East Side or West Side. But other than that, like, that's where the conversation ends. Nobody ever questions me. No, really, where are you from? And so if it doesn't happen to me as a white person, and it does happen to someone else because of the way they look, like, obviously I'm being treated differently.
Right.
And I think that question comes up a lot as a common microaggression, and hopefully, because that's one of the things that keeps coming out in these conversations, hopefully that'll start to stop.
Right. Yeah, because sometimes one time when I was in college, I was talking to like a person, and we were just talking, having a good conversation. She asked me where I was from, and I was like, I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. And the accent, of course, came out. And having conversations just about, I think we were both English majors, so we were just talking about our books, and I think she was in my class. And then she was like, you talk really well for somebody from Baltimore. And I was like, I didn't even know what to say at that point. Because I was like, are you saying I talk well for being a Black person or for being from Baltimore? Because either way, I feel some type of way about that. And after that, I don't even think I could talk to her. I was like, I don't know how comfortable I feel about this conversation anymore. And for some reason, I just kept on thinking about this. So now I feel like I have to talk a certain type of way to her, and I don't know why I'm trying to appease her. Like, I don't know, like, I had all these emotions that I was going through, and I had no way of dealing with it. And she probably didn't even know, because I was continuing the conversation. And I was like, that's a right there.
You didn't say anything to her about it?
I didn't know how to, like, at that point, like, in my life, I didn't know how to react. I think after that, we never talked again, or I didn't want to have a one-on-one conversation ever again with her. If it was mostly if I was having like something with her, it was more for school.
In a group setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, but that happened to you in college, so it's clearly something that's stayed with you for
Mhm.
a while. That was really meaningful and impactful on your life, and the idea of microaggressions. I watched a video that I put up on the library's research guide about microaggressions and how those things are. I think they called them like bee stings, where one bee sting, it hurts and it's annoying, but when you get stung by a bee 8 times in one day, then it's
It hits you.
traumatizing.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that's what happens with microaggressions. Like I feel like first you don't really recognize them until you start, and you know you have certain feelings, but you don't recognize them.
mhm.
And sooner or later, when you start feeling them, like you said, every day, or you feel like somebody's saying something that could be triggering, it really triggers you and
Mhm.
feel some type of way, one about the person, but about yourself too. Like you start internalizing certain things. And I think now as I'm learning about microaggressions and how I'm feeling, I know how to express what I want to say, I guess,
Okay.
in a way that I'm like, well, I don't know what you mean. Probably more in a way of like humor. Sometimes humor could be good, but in a way like, what do you mean by that? Like, where are you from? You talk really well from being from, like, I forgot where she was from, but yeah.
Texas. Those are all the questions that I had for you. So is there anything else that you wanted to share about this material or about your experience working through these kinds of issues with students as an academic advisor at Goucher?
I would just have to say that I was read the book, and one of the things I think is the most important is I think it's time for people to like learn their history. And what I mean by that is Black history is a part of your history too, because it's US history. And you should really take the time to really understand and explore people of color stories so you can really understand how to fight systematic racism too.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's not just 1 month out of the year that we should celebrate and learn about Black history. It should be embedded in
Mm,
everything. Like we were talking about the
yeah,
RPP in the curriculum. Absolutely.
yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really great to talk to you. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to do this so we can share this with our Goucher community. So this